incredibly special week of ACFC Community Conversations for Black History Month. Honor the past, face the present, shape the future. These conversations will range across the world of sport, from professional athletes and actors who've reached the highest echelons of their fields to youth players who are at the beginning of their journeys. Now, tonight's discussion really will set the stage for this week by giving an overview of the state of the sports and media landscape through personal stories from exceptional individuals throughout the industry. And to moderate this evening's panel, an individual that has seen sport play an integral role in both as an athlete and in business, Courtney Carter. Courtney is an entrepreneur who builds bridges through storytelling and brand building. She's the founder of Carter Media Group, CMG, a management and media company that represents innovative, inclusive, and disruptive people, stories, and ideas that shift culture. CMG's roster of talent includes the onlys in their spaces. And previously, Carter served as an agent at Creative Artists Agency, where she created talent and brand partnerships and packaged and sold multiple shows. And prior to CAA, he worked across the sports industry with marketing and sales roles at ESPN, Soccer United Marketing and Major League Soccer, and Madison Square Garden. And in 2020, she founded a nonprofit, Alley to Action, an organization that aims to accelerate racial reconciliation by creating opportunities and experiences that transform fear of participation into courageous engagement and conversation. So with that, I will turn it over to you to introduce the rest of the panelists and get things started.
Hey, Angela.
Hey.
Thank you for that. That was so amazing. And I'm not going to let you go that easy. I feel like, ACFC has put together this epic week of conversations, and it would not kick off the right way if we didn't have you in conversation as well. So will you indulge me in fangirling a little bit on you and asking you some questions?
Courtney, absolutely.
All right. A lot of people don't know, but I played this soccer as well, the sport, and grew up. And Angela are we're pretty close in age, and so while we never played against each other, personal big fan, and even more now. We've recently gotten to know each other a little bit, and her dedication to the community and to having these conversations is really, really meaningful. And this we recently caught up as we were about to talk about today's conversation. And Angela, I might just jump right in with some questions if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
You're going to be here all week moderating the conversation. So what do they mean to you, like personally and professionally?
I think this is such a critical moment in time. I think we're really at this tipping point. We have all experienced something as a world together with this pandemic. And we are now in a heightened phase, I think, when we talk about racial injustice, which is one of the reasons that Angel City has put this together. And for me, when Angel City was formed, they talked about inclusivity, diversity, representation, community, and also not just using the words, right? These are actionable being taken to foster the conversation, but really to have some opportunities to think differently, to share personal stories and experiences. And, I'm a woman of color. I have really been in sports all my life. And to do something that is community-based, impactful, is so important to me personally. And to be able to do it in this way where we're going to be able to hear from different people and their experiences, I think is very meaningful and very powerful. And this time, there's no better time to talk about it. And I really feel like we each have a responsibility. It doesn't matter who you are, what age you are, what color you are, how you identify. This topic and these discussions will impact every single person in our world. So I think it's going to be very, very powerful.
Thank you. And, it's been said a lot, obviously, in the past year. It's not enough to not be racist. but to be anti-racist and what that means and how we can apply that to our lives and the power of sport and media in those conversations. You know, what do you think is most necessary to facilitate progress? And then if you could quickly maybe share a personal anecdote, when did you first realize you were Black, the Black player, on your teams? I know you grew up in Virginia, but I guess those two things, and then, I'll introduce the panel, but I didn't want to start this panel without hearing your experience.
Yeah, I think in terms of the first question, education is a very strong rooted value in my family. Both my parents were educators. So growing up, that value was definitely instilled in me early on. And so I think that is really the crux of it. We talk about education helping to get rid of ignorance and also just seeing what it's like to live in someone else's shoes. So I think to be able to have conversations, that's really going to help foster communication more effectively, to see things and hear things that maybe you do or think before. And so I think that's really the foundation of it from where we come on. And in terms of the second question, that's really interesting too, because growing up and when I first started playing soccer, I was 7 years old, with my pigtails, loved having the orange slices at halftime, drew me into the but I was the only girl and playing on all boys teams. And so for me, that was really where I started feeling my immediate difference was the gender difference. And it really wasn't until later on in life that I think I really started to think more about being Black, being a person of color. And I think probably the best story to share is when I was playing with the national team. And I was constantly compared and identified as other players who were the Black players on the team, which there were just a few of us. So people would call me Shannon Box. Now we did play the same position, so maybe there's a little bit of, hair back and everything like that. But, people, Daniel Slayton, I remember going to sign an autograph and, the person, oh, I'm a goalkeeper too. And I was like, I'm not Brianna Scurry. I'm not a goalkeeper. So I think having that experience and for us, I think in terms of maybe it was more a survival mechanism and just kind of trying to laugh it off. But I think those experiences really helped me to see how other people either viewed me or saw me. And I think that was probably the first time I started being hyper of being Black and being Black in a sports team.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think that, again, we could do this all night, and there's so much to hear from everyone. And so I want to bring everybody else on stage, so to speak, so we can continue to talk about this experience, because I know that you so eloquently said education is what we need, and to give people the grace and the space to learn. But I think everyone who's shown up tonight, that's a huge step, right? To listen to the stories. And I'm so excited to introduce the panel. Here we go. Once I say your name, guys, just pop on screen. I'm going to say it all at the same time, and then we'll jump right in and get to it. I am really honored to introduce fellow ACFC owner and investor, Kobe Jones, not to mention the legendary US national team men's player and kind of, LA guy. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And if you guys did not know, he is also running for the vice presidency of the USSF. So we'll get into that a little bit. Jessica Mendoza, the Olympic gold and silver medalist. People may or may not know, she broke the barrier to be the first woman to actually be calling a Major League Baseball game, and has really seen and done it all as it pertains to sport and media and entertainment. Lolita Lopez, an investigative reporter and anchor for NBC4. She has been a staple of the LA community, specifically as it pertains to anything in the Latinx community, an athlete herself, former Harvard grad. I'm gonna just dust her shoulder off there a little bit. We're really excited to have her a part of the conversation tonight. And then Jonathan Lewis, you guys may or may not know, Jonathan's currently playing for the Colorado Rapids Major League Soccer Club and is on the men's national team. He himself is really excited to talk about this today. He was talking to us earlier, and we're really excited to have a current player who has experienced a lot recently as a part of Black Players for Change and other things. So thank you everyone for being here. Okay, should we have everybody unmute? Cool. I'm just going to jump in, guys. I want this to be a conversation. I'm also would be remiss to say, those of you in the audience, please ask questions. At the end, we will be taking questions. So if there's something that you want to ask to any one particular person, please throw it in, and Angela will be crossing those over, shall I say, for us to finish them off. So anyway, Kobe, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind. I'm going to piggyback off the question I asked Angela there at the end. I'm going to kind of get right to it. As somebody who played very early on for the men's national team and saw a lot of early success and kind of became one of the faces of US soccer, what was the moment in time when you realized, yes, I'm the face, but I'm Black, like you knew you were different by way of the skin color next to the rest of your teammates?
You know, it's interesting, Courtney, when you talk about this. I mean, I could go even farther back, you know, than my experience on the national team. That for me, it goes when I was a young kid playing at the very early stages of the game. First and foremost, you know, my parents grew up in the segregated South, the part of the the experiences that they had. They took the onus on themselves to make sure that I was informed and understood the situation that I would be facing, you know, going out on the field at 6, 7. And now imagine a parent having to have that conversation, you know, with a young kid. But one point that really stands out for me is I can remember at one of those tournaments that we all played in, and going up to a tournament. I remember at halftime, it was my grandmother that was actually on the sidelines, and there, you know, at that time, you know, the teams were right next to each other. And I remember hearing one of the parents, you know, saying, "Why does he have to play this sport? They already have all the other sports," you know, and that registered in my head and just kind of, you know, threw me, you know, pushed me back a little bit. I was like, "What's he talking about?" And I could
How old were
figure it
you?
out what he meant by that. And my grandmother was the one that really pulled me aside right away and just told me, "Do not worry about what anybody else says about you. You know who you are. Your parents have taught you. I've taught you. You are a good person, a special person. You do what you need to do. They're just jealous." You know, and it's a basic conversation that you have with an 8, 9-year-old, you know, in that range of a kid. But that stuck with me because I still remember it to this day. You know, that was like the first moment of where I realized, okay, I'm different than the rest of my team. I'm different than most of the other teams, players on other teams that I will be going up against. So for me, it really went way back, and it kind of stuck with me throughout my whole career, where there are a variety of instances, you know, through my whole career, where you could just name them one after the other, where you can tell that you stand apart from the majority.
And thank you for sharing that. I think people forget, right? They may know Kobe, the national team player, right? But it really goes way back to those formative years. And, you know, part of these community conversations is, you know, is to honor the past, right? And, you know, I think I appreciate you for bringing that up, because without doing so, you know, we're not able to really face our present, right? And then help shape the future. Jessica and Lolita, I'll ask you, and Jonathan, everyone wants to pipe in here, but the one thing I think there's a lot of people may or may not realize, you've all represented our country as well, right? As it pertains to being a person of color. And has there been experiences in your past that maybe gave you pause as you put on those colors, or not, and why?
I was going to jump in here and say, to piggyback off what Kobe was saying, I think it was my first youth national team camp that I went to. I realized that I was different because everybody else in the camp was not my color, basically. And growing up, I felt like all my coaches kept telling me, you have to play in the academy to get seen by the national team. You got to be playing at these higher levels, ODP, yada, 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 all this stuff. And my mom and dad, they worked so hard to try to get me into these academy, paying for these academy soccer teams that cost so much money. And, eventually it worked out. I was able to go to a youth national team. But the first thing that I realized was that all the coaches were different than me. All the players were different from me. When I went to my first youth national team, they were all different from me. And then I started to ask myself, why are they all different? And, it's like when they say, some black athletes, black people in the working industry, they start a step behind. And I realized is that, all these kids, they can afford to play in these academies and their parents can just churn out all this money for them to play. And, I'm sitting there, my mom and dad are working 2 jobs just to send me to soccer practice. And that's when I really realized that I'm different, is that they all had a head start in youth soccer to get looked at by colleges for a youth national team. And we had to do so much more just to get me in front of a pair of eyes for colleges and for overseas team and for youth national team coaches. And that's really when I realized that, it's very different soccer here in this country. And for Black athletes who play soccer, it's more, I guess you could say it's almost a privileged sport. And for me, that was like the first time that I really realized that, I'm playing in a sport that, might not be as accepting in America to a Black athlete as other sports.
Yeah, I think, and it's really interesting to hear. That's what I love about these kind of panels, by the way, is, obviously I wish we were all like hanging out like on stage, but just all the different stories, the backgrounds, experiences. I mean, for me, I think growing up and realizing, well, not even so much realizing so much growing up, but actually once, I had USA across my chest, being, at the Olympic Games and getting to meet so many other athletes, and the understanding for me, not just being Hispanic, but being a female, which I felt like, at least in my family and the background that I knew growing up in Southern California and my father's family being from Mexico, was that most women didn't get the opportunity to play sports. And for a lot of countries that are Hispanic based, the opportunity for girls to play at least my sport in softball was non-existent, very limited, just frowned upon. And I felt that from family that was further removed from just my father. So just a lot of like, this is unusual to have this kind of support for a young girl, and to see my cousins, the male versus female. So it's interesting because for me, it wasn't so much American, not American, as much as it was within being Mexican, being female and being male. So for me, it was like, I'm going to show that being Mexican American as a female, that we can do anything. And I felt that support from my father, which I was so grateful for, and within my immediate family, but just seeing so many of my cousins growing up, and then going and representing our country, knowing that in the US compared to when I was in Mexico, so much seeing the female, the same side, but it's like they're across the border, and the lack of opportunity, if that makes sense, from a sport standpoint, to be able to have just access, like to go out and play, and the support of like, you're a girl and you can. Whereas my male cousins, it was like, especially like soccer, it was totally normal. But for girls to play any sport was just, you just didn't see it. And if it happened, it was like secret, because your family could say, this isn't going to happen.
You bring up a really good point. I was going to say, Lolita, if I could, you were going to chime in there, but I saw you had a quote once in an LA84 press conference, and you said very, very strongly, like, use your voice. And it struck a chord with me. Can you maybe expound on a bit more of the kind of race versus gender argument, or kind of situation as opposed to argument?
Yeah, Jessica really hits an interesting point about the cultural differences that there might be within our own communities that sort of can limit, the success of young women, for example, to find sport. I remember my grandmother saying that women didn't sweat. So what was I doing running around, like going to practices and stuff? And she just didn't know any better because she, was born in 1908 when like that just didn't, she just wasn't brought up in that generation. Now, luckily, my mother was very different. My father was women's track and field coach at Rice University for 35 years. He coached Olympians. I was always sort of brought up on the track with my Punky Brewster shoes. So at a very early age, like for me, sports was always part of a future that I could have. And so I had that within what I knew that I could do with that family dynamic. So that support was there. But I would find not that much support when I was looking outside of certain, places, right? So my family was supportive, including even my grandmother, by the way, bless her heart, she really was. And she understood it later on. And once I went to college and, was also playing on club teams, Jonathan and stuff, those were the types of places where I was told, well, you're only 5'6". You don't really want to play outside hitter. You're not going to be good enough for that. Or you come from over here, and those types of players, like you really should be doing this. And that's when I first learned to start using my voice in a way that like was give me a chance, give me an opportunity, let me prove it to you. I may not always be successful, but I need the chance to do it. And I think that opportunity is really where we find that we can find some sort of common denominator, because sports can really be transcending and really like cross lines of race and gender, but only if it's equitable. And if we're still facing these social and racial disparities within our society, it sort of also comes in sports. And we're seeing that sort of magnified, right? During the time of COVID, during the time of social injustice that we're having. And so I think these conversations, especially with sport, because it can be such a unifier, if we come to some sort of place where we can find equality even at a youth level, so that young kids, young ladies like me at 6 were like, my name's Lolita Lopez and I can play. And I would walk in like that, they have that sort of bravado and being able to use your voice. So that's what I meant by that. And it continues to like, I'm in my career 20 plus. I was a main sports anchor in New York. I was on the field, with the late great Tom Seaver and Dave O'Brien and covering the Mets. And even then I faced challenges all throughout those times when you think like, oh, someone has made it because you see them on television, like there's still hurdles to jump over, if I use a track analogy, and stairs to climb. So we're still in that moment, but that progress is happening as long as we find opportunity and people to have our voice and have our back.
Lolita, my notes literally are like, transcendence, sport. Thank you for the segue.
You're welcome.
Also, I feel like with ACFC, we should have a whole campaign where we have little girls just say their name and that they could like, I'm obsessed with that, all of that.
I'm Lolita Lopez and I can play. Like I am like that. It was just, I took that and I'm like, yes, every young
Courtney Carter
there was a little sassy
Jessica,
sauce. Now you understand why I'm a journalist and I like peeked my head in first in this video, like a little sassy sauce from the beginning. Yeah.
So speaking of sport and transcendence, right? I think it's always why I've been drawn to the industry, because it's escapism for a lot of people. You come, you don't know who you're standing next to and what their story is, but you're all there for the same reason, to support hopefully the right team, depending on who and what. Kobe, like, do you think that the transcendence of sport, right? Do you think that it actually transcends race? If we're going to actually, even though race is a construct and we could go down a rabbit hole on that, but do you think sport can do that? And if so, why? If not, why?
It can't be a rabbit hole, first off, but yeah, I think sport can transcend everything. Look, we're still going to have issues that will come up in certain situations, because I'm sure everybody here has experienced racism, within the sport, not only from fans, but from opponents, sometimes teammates. These are things that just happen. It's the nature of people, of humans getting together. There's always that. But what I would say is that sport tends to bring more people together than separate. You know, you get people together, you gather groups together. And one of the things that I always say with sport, it allows people that may not like each other to focus on a project together and work towards that common goal. And when you're working towards a common goal of something, all of a sudden you start to understand the other people that you're working with. You start to notice maybe some of the differences aren't so bad. Maybe some of the differences you actually enjoy and like about somebody else. And if you can get a team, you know, that I always like to say, and I'll put it just from the team aspect, you can get a team, a group of 18, 25, whatever it is, working together towards one goal, all of a sudden, to be successful, that group has to push things and leave things behind. And then when people do that and leave those things behind and have success, all of a sudden, all those other things, all those other issues aren't so bad. And that's when people start coming together. So for me, yes, sports transcends, you know, and sports slowly, I'll say it, forces people to work together and be better, you know, just as human beings.
I do think it's interesting though, like that, you know, I feel like on so many teams, and it's changing, I'm sure, the last couple of years, but one thing I noticed, because for us, I'm super politically active, and every Olympic year is an election year. And so like my goal being, you know, Olympians is like, we got to be at least registered to vote and then have these discussions, which, I mean, you're talking about 18 women on a bus touring the country, like preparing for the Olympics and having these political discussions. But what's interesting is that like you never really think about like your teammates as being any different, because they're your sisters. This is your team. Besides being like, okay, her backhand's not as good, she's weak on the drop ball. Like that's how I see my teammates, is like how we combine as athletes and our passions. But I found that over the course of decades that we hardly had the harder conversations. Like we try to avoid, you know, talking about, okay, you grew up here, I grew up here. Like you just made a joke about like those being strawberry pickers down, like my family, that they pick strawberries. Like, you want to get into this? Like, I wouldn't bring it up because you never wanted to fight within your own team. And that's what I've noticed a change, and I'm hoping is a shift, is not only within our country, within globally, but like even within sports that we transcend. Sometimes I feel like we also avoid, like we still, because we got to work together, let's not talk about the stuff that's going to make us fight. And our coach actually told me to stop having, because I would go, okay, all right, we got one side here, we got left, we got right. Let's have some debates. And it got to where our team was like, we were fighting, but it made us, in my opinion, closer. But my coach was like, okay, Jess, I love you, but like X on the like political discussions. And it wasn't just politics. It was like your upbringing, like your background. I mean, the things that would come out of my teammates' mouth, I'm like, oh my God, you're so racist. Like, but I got to go bat after you tomorrow. I got to score you and like love you. Like, but that's how we are as humans, like figuring out a way to have the hard discussions and then coming together after you realize you're on different ends.
Yeah. Jonathan, how have you found yourself having to have you ever found yourself having to kind of initiate that hard conversation and or deciding consciously to not have it, and why?
No, definitely. I mean, well, obviously this summer when we were after the George Floyd thing happened, we had to have the conversation with our team, you know, a few of us Black players on the team, have those conversations about what are we going to do moving forward to educate people and get people to realize what the movement is, you know, obviously with the Black Players for Change. So we definitely had to have that conversation within our own locker room first. And, you know, one of the things that we preach is being comfortable, being uncomfortable. So, and there's obviously a bunch of guys from all over the world that are in our locker room. And, you know, some of these conversations, some of these stuff, social injustice don't happen as often in other countries like they do in America. And that's just the reality of it. And, you know, so some of them, they don't see some of the things that we're trying to do as important as we do as Americans see it. So when we have to now have the conversation to educate some of the other players on our team, then they start to open up their eyes and they're like, oh, wow, like this really happens to Jonathan when he was younger. And this is something that now he wants to change. They don't, that stuff doesn't happen for some of those other players. So I feel like you always want to have those conversations when you can, because I think when you have the chance to educate, you know, you should take it. You have every right to educate someone. So I think, you know, as a Black American and with freedom of speech, I feel like I always want to try to educate people when I think they're in the wrong, or when they're speaking and they don't know what they're talking about. So, and I always want to have those conversations because I'm comfortable talking about the uncomfortable stuff.
Well,
yeah, if I could jump in too, I was the same way, even like Jessica and Jonathan, throughout like my entire, collegiate career, both in track and volleyball. And I remember having those conversations with folks that, even I say even at Harvard, right? Because I just expected people to be worldly and understand. And I remember my freshman year roommate, field hockey player, had never been in school or in any institution without anyone who wasn't Caucasian. So when she got Lolita Lopez as her roommate, like it literally was like, I don't know how to deal with this. I've never met anyone like this. Like she expected all of these different, she looked up Puerto Rico. She was trying to figure out like what we were like, and I remember like playing with someone from Germany, and I grew up in Texas, and they thought like that I would wear a cowboy hat and cowboy boots all the time. It's just these like, it's these moments to like have educated conversations and be like, okay, that comes off a little wrong. Here's why. And let me explain to you why that's not the case. And, over the course of the years that we knew each other in school, like she really gained some great perspective on what it was like to be with someone that she had never had any experiences with. And I think a part of it is just like Jonathan was saying, just educating. And I also think with all of us, it's having our own internal and external conversations, if you will, of our own biases, right? And really confronting that. And if you are with a coworker, even, I'm very lucky to be at NBC, we're having these conversations throughout these moments about like what we put on TV. If you need an expert and that expert happens to be, why go to the same well every time? There are experts of all different colors and race and backgrounds and ethnicities. Go find someone from Cal State LA, go find someone from USC, next time go, somewhere at Cal State Northridge, because they're out there. And when we show more women, more people of color, speaking as experts, speaking as people with knowledge of something, I think that also really resonates. So having those conversations, even on the media side, is really important.
Again, great segue. Thank you very much, Lolita. I want to bring up too something, the idea of being a representative of a race, right? And the idea that being Latin or Mexican or Puerto Rican or Black isn't monolithic, right? And the pressure that comes with that idea, I think as a woman, I can speak to being in a room where I'm the only woman, so automatically I'm speaking for all women, and I don't want that pressure, frankly. How do you feel like media and opportunities like this and having these hard conversations can help kind of educate? I think that's maybe the theme here is education. We'll get to some questions. I know there's some coming in. Please keep them coming. The idea that being of an ethnic group or an ethnic minority is not a monolithic idea, and how media can help kind of change and shift that idea. That, to your point, Lolita, like unless someone asks, if they've never had an experience like your roommate with somebody, they're just gonna have their assumptions based on media, right? And images.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think part of it is like the labeling that happens, right? So like, why do I have to be a Latina reporter? I'm just a journalist, right? And I think labeling certain things, even when we, put things on television, when we call someone the best female athlete, why can't she just be the best athlete, one of the best athletes, so really giving labels like that already sort of divides into male, female, this, that, best Black soccer player. Well, what does that even mean? Why aren't you just one of the best soccer players out there? Like there are ways that we have when we put things out there that are really important, and the way that the media presents athletes and sports. I think, in terms of that part of it, I think is really important in the way that I think people see sports and the way that we put it out there. And for me, it's always that balance, right? And having those conversations within our own newsrooms, whether they're local or national. I also think that now that there's so many avenues to get your sport, that if it's not in a place where it's happening for you, like I had an opportunity when I was in my mid-20s to go do a national and international job. And I was super excited. And this was it. I was like, I'm going to make it. This is it. I'm going to get this job. And I went through 4 rounds of interviews. I remember sitting in an interview and thinking, oh, this is it. And the gentleman was saying, you're really great. We love everything you do. But I have a concern that you might be too Hispanic for the Hispanics. And I sat there for a second. I was like, I don't even know how to answer this. I said, well, I think I appreciate your thoughts. I disagree with, and I think that people will actually appreciate myself as a whole and not look at that one thing. And I think that's that they won't question that. Get in the car, talk to my agent. And I said, please refuse any opportunity at that place, because I feel like if they're already talking to me in the interview, when I go there to work there, there will not be a place for me, the whole Lolita, to be able to present herself, give ideas, think outside the box, and have someone say, hey, listen, I really like that idea. Let's go with it. Let's try it. And so, finding spaces and people and managers and bosses that will allow you to do that is also an important thing. But I always think that the labeling is what kind of, I am all of these things, not one,
Right.
And so that for me is really important, even as I present the news or whatever I'm going to be doing as well.
Sure. Thank you. Anybody else want to chime in on the kind of monolithic point? If not, we can move on.
I'll say something quickly. Oh, sorry.
No, go Kobe.
I was just saying, just go to any of our houses to a family reunion and you'll know it's not a monolithic situation. There's fighting and everything all over the place. And everyone's laughing because we know it's true. It's kind of a silly thought that I think that is put out there that, just because that you're a representative of the race, this one person. No, we are not the totality of the whole race that we are a part of. And I think people need to realize that. That's all I gotta say.
Well said. Jessica?
I was going to say, so now that I work on the media side, so being in a lot of these rooms and conversations, and it is interesting because we'll have all right, so we're going to do, it's Hispanic Heritage Month every October, and it's Jess, what, and there tends to just be this ideas of what Hispanics would and here's some certain Latin music, and we can talk about, What's interesting to me though is when I bring up a point that isn't even agreeable within what they expect a woman or a Hispanic woman to say. And I've started to actually crave those moments because some sick part of me likes to be the record screecher. I love because then I know I probably can't cuss, but it's real. It's this is something that, because it's different, right? My thing is we're just doing things the same way we've always been doing them. And to Lolita's point, being the woman that's I'm only the woman ever in the room, definitely usually the only Hispanic. But I like to say things that don't even fall into those boxes, where it's just can I stop the room? And can we just and it doesn't mean they'll agree with me or we'll even do the things I'm implementing, but I try to let's think differently about how we're approaching our Latin audience, Sure. And that's from the media standpoint. I feel yes, they're trying to be more, but it is unbelievably monolithic with and one last point, because I cover baseball, we have Latin players and it drives me nuts when we go, okay, we're going to talk about Latin players and we're talking Cubans, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Mexicans, Venezuelans. Can we differentiate these groups? Talk about monolith, Latin players, hello, being from Cuba versus Venezuela versus Puerto Rico versus Mexico, hello, you can't get more different. And so recognizing that when we have players from those different backgrounds, how we talk about them and not just put them in a blanket category.
Yeah, I learned that when I moved to New York. I lived in New York 11 years. I was wow, I think I got a massive education on, the diversity within ethnicity, right? And there's a lot of pride as well too. So I think it's also a very, a nuanced conversation. You guys keep talking about conversation and having the uncomfortable conversation. Jonathan, you had mentioned, I work I work with a lot of people who are the onlys in their spaces, who are predominantly a person of color in a very predominantly white space. And I work with an organization called allied action and a lot of what we do, and we recognize is there's a lot of people who are of the white race who find themselves a little paralyzed. How do I ask the question? How do I approach that? Because they have a fear of maybe saying the wrong thing, or you know, pissing someone off, for lack of a better term. How would you guys, and Jonathan, I'll ask you, because you kind of mentioned be comfortable with the uncomfortable conversation. How would you maybe give someone some advice to ask a question that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise before?
I mean, the way I've gone about it with some of just my own friends and people in my community, I just kind of say, like, you know, obviously I've had discussions with some of my friends about, you know, racial injustice and things like that. And I just kind of say, like, look, if you don't understand something, just ask a question and just be honest, say what you might think, and then we can have a discussion without, and, you know, without pissing each other off, you know. But if I open up the floor for them to say something that might be even uncomfortable to me, or, you know, but I'm telling them, like, look, like, I understand some people are just not educated enough. Say what you think, say what's on your mind, and let's talk about it. I feel like that makes them now a little bit more comfortable to, you know, maybe say, like you said, for lack of a better term, say something that might piss me off in another setting. You know what I mean? So I think just giving them that floor to speak their mind to an extent. Of course, they can't go overboard now, but giving them that floor to speak their mind, so then we can have a conversation. And that's also how I can get an understanding how much educating they really need, how ignorant they could be as well, you know. So that's how I normally, with some of my friends, you know, obviously I'm a little bit younger, so with my friends, that's how I kind of go about it when I'm speaking to my friends about some of the stuff going on in the world.
And I think it goes between, you know, to gender as well, right? I think for people speaking from a place of privilege, myself, a place of white privilege in this country, to say, okay, I don't know, help me understand, and just truly listening, right? And respecting that space of listening, just like maybe a man should say, help me understand as a woman how that feels, right? And, you know, it goes without saying, you know, Kobe, you're an owner in a women's franchise. You know, you're running to represent and be an advocate for men's and women's national team players and the development of the future of soccer of this country. What is, you know, how would you broach that conversation with the federation, with the players, you know, with youth? I want to kind of like pivot into talking about the future, right? And how we can set ourselves up for success.
No, I think it's pretty simple, as Jonathan said, as far as it's starting the conversation. You know, first and foremost, it's talking to the people that have, you know, that are involved in it at the moment. And it's also talking to people that have been part of it in the past. You know, it's talking to people like Angela that has been part of the women's national team and listening to the experiences, getting advice from those people as well, and trying to figure out the best practices, you know, going forward. I think one of the big issues that we have is that people don't listen, you know, and people could be talking and saying, and it's a cold shoulder, or it's just a turned head, or it's just like, yeah, we got it, but not really listening and not trying to put anything into action. If we can actually start the process of actually trying to put things into action, I think people will be surprised that goes a long way in itself, because everyone realizes this isn't easy. This isn't stuff that's going to turn around in one day. You know, this is stuff that's going to take a while. But if we can start taking that first step and start trying and start working together, you know, with the different individuals, all of a sudden it's like, okay, maybe this isn't as fast as I'd like, but we're getting there. You know, and that's one thing that you know, as you mentioned, as I'm running for vice president position, that I would like to do, is to actually start those conversations, listen to the people that, you know, are involved in it from the past and in the moment right now, and try to see if we can make it better for the future. You know, it's as simple. Sometimes it sounds like that, but it's just as simple and as plain as that.
You know, playing off of your point, I'm actually working on a story for Black History Month with Jackie Joyner-Kersee. And we were talking about, the conversation is about how Black female athletes are leading voices of change for social and racial injustice. And one of the things I asked her was like, back in, you know, 84, 88, 92, do you feel like you had a voice? And she's like, yeah, but at the time, like if you were seen as a negative, journalists would move away from you. They didn't want to discuss anything that wasn't what you were doing necessarily on the track and how you were competing or that kind of success. And what was interesting is there weren't other avenues. And she brought up social media and, you know, all of these ways that, you know, if the avenue isn't there with necessarily the more traditional spaces, that there are all of these other spaces where the conversations are happening, to find those avenues and find those places that let you have those conversations. And, you know, even back before there was social media, and yes, I'm that old that I remember that, you know, I was trying to find spaces like the job that I didn't take or the other job that I didn't take because they said, you can have it, but you have to straighten your hair permanently. And I was like, no, thank you very much. I found spaces where I could use my voice, ask a lot of questions, be a little bit confrontational in a respectful way, and, you know, really move the needle forward in the spaces that I was in to have a chance to, you know, tell the story about the softball player who was a pitcher who lost her sight and explore, you know, Collegiate Women in Sports Awards, an organization that had been around for 20 years at the time, but nobody knew anything about it. And we did it, you know, on prime time in New York, like doing those kind of things and getting support from my managers at the time. And currently, obviously, I'm doing this amazing story about Black female athletes. Like getting that support behind you is also a great place to go. And knowing that you don't have to just take one road, that the journey can take you other places and in other ways.
Yeah, and allyship is also not monolithic, right? It's also a journey. It's not a destination. And Jessica, I know we might lose you here soon, so I wanted to kind of see if you had any kind of parting words about the youth, right? I think you've had this really interesting vantage point, right? As a player, as a broadcaster, as a woman in a very male space, as a Mexican American in a very, you know, non-Mexican American space. What and how do you feel the youth can give us, right? Can teach us? Who kind of, I feel like, grew up in lanes, right?
I mean, honestly, I don't know, I have two boys and it blows my mind how simple it is. Like, I feel like if we could just have the youth take over, like the things that come out of their mouth, like, and yeah, I understand that kids are brought up differently and they might, but I actually think there aren't lanes yet. Like I think we can learn so much by how simple it actually is. Like when you see it through the eyes of an 8-year-old, and I'm in it right now, it simplifies it for me. Like I think that I'm pretty like, okay, like I'm open with all of this and understanding, and then like they'll just say it like some blatant like why don't we just love, or like something will come out of their mouth that they just see things so pure, because that's how it's supposed to be. You know, we don't judge. We shouldn't have stereotypes. Society puts on so many things of what we think. Media, Courtney, to your point, what we see, shoot, Instagram, like you look, you know, the certain looks, you know, there's so much there. So I personally think that I don't want to teach youth anything when it comes to, I just want them to continue to see things simply and purely, and for us to stop getting in the way of that.
Wow. That's powerful.
Oh my gosh, I just wanted to jump in because that's exactly what I was going to say. I think the adults step in and get in the way sometimes of what the kids are really teaching us, you know. And I have a 16-year-old daughter who, you know, plays sports and have been playing and sort of like, because of so much of the pressure to play, has lost a little bit of the passion to play. And, you know, bringing that back in, the fun of it, the not like you have to have a private, you have to be on this club team, you have to be in this place. That's the only place you're going to be seen. And that pressure, and you forget that it's fun. And this is a way for like people to come together and a way for you to meet other people and laugh and have the orange slices, Angela, after like the game, you know, really coming back to that. Those are really the important moments. Some of the best moments I remember from collegiate ball were like dancing on the bus when we beat Princeton for the first time. Like I can remember everything about that moment, and sort of not all the plays that I either made or didn't make on the court. You know what I mean? So like there's something to that freshness of and that fun that sports should be in the youth. Even through like high school, that I feel like really needs to come back so that people just enjoy it. So these kids are just enjoying it and don't feel so much pressure.
I want to be mindful of time. We've got about 10 minutes. I want to get to some questions, but I want to just kind of mirror back what I've heard you guys say over and over, which is to celebrate differences, right? And to educate, and to not be afraid of having a hard conversation, even if it's with somebody you might not know, to humble yourself and say, hey, I don't think I know this, but I'm a little curious. Can you help me understand? Right. And that, not to lead it to media, but that media does have power and words do matter. So, you know, I wanted to get to a question. There's a lot here. So this will be a little popcorn style in terms of who wants to answer. And Angela, please jump in here if you want to answer. What, as an athlete or professional, what are some of the hurdles you've had to overcome maybe that were there for you that may not have been there for a white counterpart?
I wanted to answer that. So for me, just having a bunch of coaches that were just white, honestly, I could just say it straight up, you know, trying to make it as a professional player and trying to get looked at by college, you know, sometimes I feel like having a bunch of white coaches, they might not want to play me as much as maybe someone else, or push me along as much as someone else who's white or not black, essentially, or not a minority, you know. I think having white coaches definitely was a hurdle, you know, but for me, I think I started to find success in soccer when I started playing with a predominantly black team. And we had a coach he's from Turkey, maybe? He's Arabic, I know that, but having him as a coach, and then we had one white coach who's only ever coached black players. He actually coached my agent, who Kobe would know, is Corey Gibbs. And he's only coached a bunch of black players. So having those two coaches, that's when I started to feel successful, and I had the confidence to just be myself on the pitch. So I think for me, that was one of the biggest hurdles. It's just, again, being in a sport that it's more of a privileged sport, and having a lot of people who are just not the same as me, as my coaches, as mentors. And, you know, I think that was the biggest hurdle overcoming youth soccer.
Have you, anybody, Jonathan, Kobe, Lolita, had to code switch in your life as a player or a professional, and why?
When you say code switch, what do you mean?
You have to tell me what code switch means.
I love that you don't know. That makes it, well, you know, go from like, are you somebody different with your black friends, right, versus who you would be around a group of white people, right? If you had a black coach, Jonathan, right, would you have maybe acted differently or played differently, or, you know, the idea of having to assimilate I guess is the idea of code switching.
I actually love that question. So I would definitely say, you know, when I was younger, again, having a white coach and being on a team when I was in like rec soccer with predominantly white people, you know, you feel scared to go out and be different and to do different things. And I guess once I started to be on a team with, you know, majority of the guys on my youth team growing up when I played for Plantation Eagles were Jamaican, Caribbean, just like myself. And when I would go to practice, like I said, I'm just laughing, I'm having fun, I'm smiling. But the biggest thing is I was being myself. But then those two coaches I had, one white and one Arabic, taught me that you don't need to change for the people who are around you. Be yourself all the time. And that's what's really going to get you as far as you want to go. So it doesn't matter if it's a white coach, it's a black coach. It doesn't matter if the coach is from, I don't even know. Like, if you're always yourself, they see your personality, they see how good you are as a player, and just always being yourself, that's going to push you farther than anything else, not your color, not being a man or a woman, but just being great.
Just to answer that question a little bit of a different way, I never had to code switch because I had the experience of never having a different coach. I always had white coaches, you know, in my sport. Maybe I was a little bit earlier than Jonathan or where I grew up, but I always had white coaches. The first time, and this is kind of goes back to what Jonathan was saying before, this is why representation matters. So you have people that you can relate to. I never had that growing up. The first time that I saw a black coach was my sophomore year of college, because I actually saw Clive Charles, you know, as a position as a coach. And that was a shock to me, you know, to see like, whoa, wait a second, there's actually former black players that are coaches, that are administrators, you know. Now he was English, but still, to me, that was like eye-opening, where I was just like, oh, wow, this is different. And that's saying something about where the sport was, you know, and where it's going. And the fact that, it wasn't until I was like 18, 19 years old until I had seen a Black player in a position of quote unquote power, with that a decision-making position in the sport that I grew up playing my whole life.
Yeah, I'm from Portland. He is the godfather of Soccer City, USA. So I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you for saying his name, because I think he's a big part of U.S. soccer and the fabric of women's soccer and the success of the University of Portland and that program. Angela, I'm going to give it back to you. I know
no, we have a question actually from the audience would like to get to. If Melissa could ask your question, I believe you will be unmuted in just a minute, Melissa. Here she is. Oh, you're still on mute, Melissa. There you go.
Sorry, my headshot popped up. I'm sorry. So hello, thank you so much for joining this event. My name is Melissa Diaz. I'm the membership relations chair for Mosaic 1781, one of the supporter groups for the team. And my question was originally for Kobe Jones, but all the panelists have been so incredible tonight that I'd love to hear from anyone that would like to weigh in on this topic. As investors, owners, or really as anyone with a general involvement in ACFC or ACFC leadership, how do you plan to use your positions to use soccer, and particularly women's soccer, as a tool for the social change that is needed so much in this country?
Good, Kobe. Then I'll chime in.
Okay, I thought someone else was going to jump in, but Melissa, thank you for the question. Now, for myself, as a founding owner investor, I think first and foremost, what I can do is support, and I think that's probably the most important thing, is to support the organization and everything that they're trying to do socially and within the local community. I think that is absolutely the step number one. If you can go local, and this is what Angel City is trying to do, all of a sudden you create that groundswell. And if I can help be a part of that, I'm more than willing to do so. If it is the part of, joining in panels, discussions, going out and actively being a participant and showing my support as a male to a predominantly female-owned organization, I think that helps. Leading by an example, being that example that I'm out there to help as much as possible, I think is a few of the ways, and to actively off of social, actively off of interviews, these are just some of the ways. And for me, I think probably one of the most important ways is being an example for my two sons. I have two young boys, so I'm trying to help for the next generation, that they understand that women's empowerment, women in sports, that it's a norm for them. And this is something that they're going to see from their young age, starting next year, that they'll be able to see this group take this idea and have it come to fruition to a full professional team playing on the field. That is something special that I think that will impact my two young boys, for the future, and impact so many other people, along the way. I think those are just some of the ways that I can help out.
And I'm not an owner or an investor in any way, but as a supporter, I think that can be a fluid thing that folks like me who don't play soccer, never played soccer, but really enjoy the sport, enjoy, female athletes, just enjoy having another LA team. Like, how exciting is that? Like, for me, that's where support can come in. So getting to games, getting my daughter and her friends to come to games, and her other friends, to just sort of support, follow, kind of keep up with that movement, and then just be volunteer where you are. Like, I volunteer with a volleyball team, a youth volleyball team here, just so that they can see that like, I've been there, I've done it, look where I am. You can be here or anywhere you want to be too. So being an example to younger folks by being present for them and not failing them, I think is also really important.
Thanks for that question, Melissa. I'm gonna just probably have time for just one more question, if we could, before we wrap up. So Carlos, if you are there, please ask your question.
Hello there. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, Carlos.
Can you hear me? Okay. So anytime there's a major event, like a major racist event, I always tend to think to myself, this is it. This is what's going to change. And then things just kind of die off, and there's really no change. Do you guys, Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm a little bit nervous. Do you guys ever see, for example, with MLS, or any sport, white players being concerned about racism more as a very important issue, instead of something that just doesn't concern them? Do you ever see the majority of white players getting involved?
Wait, can you guys hear me? Okay. So to answer that question, actually, with the national team, we just had a camp and we played against Trinidad and Tobago. And believe it or not, we had a discussion with our coach, Greg. He wanted to have an open discussion, the whole team. And to see the amount of white players, Walker Zimmerman, Aaron Long, Christian Roldan, Christian Mueller, so many of those guys chiming in, giving us ideas how we can continue to go on with this, with the movement. For me, it was shocking to see that, because these are also quiet players too, except for Walker. Walker talks a lot, but these are quiet players. And when we had this discussion, first of all, we watched a movie called One Night in Miami, which was a very, very, very powerful movie that we watched as a team. And after that, we had this discussion, and to see how many players, white players again, that really cared about the movement, almost so much more than like the black players that were there, but they were not afraid to put input in these discussions, and then they wanted to do all this work to keep everybody's mind thinking about all the stuff that are going on in the world. We had an idea for the game. I know we wore the anthem jackets that said "Be the Change," but originally the quote that we wanted, and Josie Altidore came up with this, is "Black lives still matter today, tomorrow, and every day forward." And I think one of the white players was the one who came up with that quote with Josie, and to see that, for me, I was like, wow, we really have the support, not only from our own players, but from the federation, from the coaching staff. These are guys that want to push this movement through the national team from the top down, from Brian McBride to Greg to all the players. So to see that, for me, though this is now at least, I think there's a lot of white players in the MLS, in the US national team, that really care about the movement, about making everybody equal.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I'm so sorry I didn't know my question was selected and I wasn't ready to ask it, but I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carlos, for the question. Courtney, before we wrap up, I'd love to just pass it over to you one more, just in the interest of time, before we wrap it up here.
Sure. I just wanted to say thank you for, as a fellow owner and investor and player and all of the things. I'm so honored to have been able to sit with you guys today and listen and be a student. And I hope, and I'm thankful for everybody who joined as well. I will say that Jonathan mentioned the team watched a movie together. I think we've talked about the importance of media and storytelling to really kind of open up the door, right, to have those conversations that might be uncomfortable. And, I work in the media and entertainment space, and, these conversations and ACFC is all about, honoring the past, facing the present, and shaping the future. And ACFC is more than just a soccer club, right? It's a movement, it's a belief system, it's an entertainment organization. And there's been a lot of questions about allyship and what and how you can arm yourself. I am a part of an amazing organization called Ally to Action. And if you just go to allytoaction.org, there's an amazing resource page there of podcasts and movies and television shows and resources that you can kind of arm yourself and your friends and family with. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Ally to Action. Check it out, and hopefully you can, we like to say, call yourself in. Bring yourself in to call yourself out, right? So, and as the lights go down behind me, so dramatic. But anyway, thank you again, everybody, for being here. It's an honor, and let's do this. Let's go ACFC.
I'll talk about segues. Courtney, thank you for your moderation tonight. Thank you, everybody, for showing up, being present, being a part of these conversations and discussions. Thank you to all of our panelists for your time and your insights and perspectives. let's leave some action items. Everybody, please go check out allytoaction.org and see what those action steps really can be. It's great to have these conversations. It's great to have the education. Now, what are we going to do with that knowledge and that power? And join us again. We'll be here every night this week, same time tomorrow as well. So please, as another action item, continue to join these conversations with Angel City FC. Thanks, everybody, and have a great night.
Good night, everyone.